The first thing Earl Dawson noticed was the smell. It wasn't manure. It wasn't compost. It was something sour and earthy drifting across the fence from Mara Whitaker's field. He stopped his tractor and stared. $30. That was all Mara had spent on the entire experiment. And it looked like garbage. Her half-acre test plot was covered with discarded leaves, spoiled hay, vegetable trimmings, corn stalks, shredded cardboard, and piles of old farm waste that other farmers had paid to haul away. Earl climbed down from his tractor. "What are you doing?" Mara didn't look up. She was spreading another layer of chopped plant material over a long raised mound. "Growing sweet potatoes." Earl stared at the mound. "Under that?" "Yes." He laughed. "You've buried your field in garbage." Mara smiled. "It's not garbage. It came out of my barn." "Exactly." Earl shook his head. "Those potatoes aren't going to grow in that." Mara pressed a handful of dark material between her fingers. "Wait until harvest." Earl climbed back onto his tractor. "I'll be waiting." He drove away laughing. Mara watched him disappear. Then she returned to work. Mara had learned about the technique by accident. The previous autumn, she had been clearing an old vegetable plot. There were piles of organic waste everywhere. Leaves, stalks, hay, vegetable scraps, grass clippings. She had intended to burn most of it. Then a university soil specialist named Laura Jensen visited her farm. Laura stopped beside one of the piles. "Why are you burning this?" "Because I have too much." Laura picked up a handful of decomposing leaves. "You have soil amendment." Mara laughed. "I have a mess." "You have carbon." Laura pointed toward the vegetable scraps. "Nutrients." Then toward the hay. "Organic matter." Mara looked at the pile differently. "What if I put it directly on a field?" Laura shook her head. "Not directly." "Why?" "Because fresh organic material can tie up nitrogen, attract pests, and create uneven decomposition." Mara nodded. "So what do I do?" "Let biology do the work first." That conversation stayed with Mara. She began researching composting systems, mulching, soil structure, and sweet potato production. Sweet potatoes interested her because they liked loose soil. Their tubers needed room to expand. Dense soil produced misshapen roots. Poor drainage caused problems. And weeds competed heavily during early growth. Mara wondered if a thick layer of properly decomposed farm waste could solve several problems at once. Instead of buying expensive amendments, she could turn waste into a growing medium. So she designed a small experiment. $30 bought the sweet potato slips. Everything else came from the farm. She started by building long raised beds. Then she layered partially decomposed leaves, old hay, shredded stalks, vegetable scraps, and finished compost. She mixed the material carefully. The final layer was dark and crumbly. Then she planted the sweet potato slips. Earl watched from the neighboring field. "How much did that cost you?" Mara called back. $30. "That's because nobody charges you for garbage." Mara laughed. "That's the point." The first 2 weeks were unimpressive. The plants looked small. Some leaves wilted during hot afternoons. Mara checked moisture constantly. She added irrigation. She adjusted the mulch. She removed weeds by hand. Earl continued watching. One morning, he shouted across the fence. "Still growing potatoes in trash." Mara waved. "Still working." Then something changed. The vines exploded. Sweet potato plants spread across the beds. The leaves became thick and dark green. The growth was so vigorous that Mara had to redirect vines back onto the beds. Laura returned to examine the soil. She pushed a probe into the mound. It sank easily. "That's what you wanted." Mara smiled. "Loose. Loose. Aerated, moisture-retentive." Laura lifted a handful. "Look at the structure." The material was full of tiny air spaces. Earthworms had appeared. Fungal networks were developing. The soil held moisture without becoming waterlogged. Mara looked across the field. How much of this came from the waste? Almost all of it. By late summer, the experiment had become the strangest field in the county. Everywhere else, farmers had neat rows of soil. Mara had tangled vines growing from enormous mounds of organic material. The field looked messy, but underneath it, something remarkable was happening. The sweet potato roots were expanding. Mara carefully dug around one plant. Her fingers touched something firm. She stopped. Then she pulled. The sweet potato emerged. It was enormous. Nathan Briggs, her farm manager, crouched beside her. "That's the first one." Mara nodded. He held it up. "That's not normal." Mara laughed. "That's exactly what I was hoping for." They dug another. Then another. The roots were thick, long, smooth, and unusually uniform. Mara began weighing samples. The numbers were far beyond what she'd expected from such a small experiment. But there was still a question. Could she repeat it? If the results depended on one unusually good section of soil, the experiment meant nothing. So Mara planted another bed. Same waste, same process, same variety, different location, and waited. The second harvest was even better. That's when Earl stopped laughing. He walked across the fence line carrying a notebook. Mara looked up. You need something? He glanced at the crates. How much did you get? Mara told him. Earl stared. From this little field? Yes. How much did you spend? About $30 on the original planting material. He looked at the piles of farm waste. And the rest? Free. Earl shook his head. I don't understand. Mara smiled. You don't have to understand it yet. Word traveled quickly. A neighbor asked for her planting notes. Then another. Then a produce buyer stopped by. He picked up one of Mara's sweet potatoes. These are unusually clean. Mara nodded. Loose growing medium. How did you grow them? Mara explained. The buyer looked toward the field. Can you supply me? Mara hesitated. How much? All you can grow. That evening, Mara sat at her kitchen table with the numbers spread out in front of her. The $30 experiment wasn't just producing good sweet potatoes. It might have uncovered a way to turn farm waste into a valuable crop. But Mara knew one thing. Before she taught anyone else the method, she needed to prove that it wasn't luck. And the next season would put her little experiment to the biggest test yet. The next season would decide everything. Mara had proven the method could work on 2 small beds. But 2 beds weren't a farm. If she wanted to turn the experiment into a real business, she needed to know whether the same approach could work across several acres. So she expanded. Not dramatically. She planted 3 acres. Instead of buying truckloads of expensive soil amendments, Mara collected discarded organic material from nearby farms. Old hay, corn stalks, vegetable trimmings, leaves, wood chips, spent bedding, anything suitable for composting. She didn't take everything. She inspected each load first. The material had to be clean and properly decomposed. Then she built long raised beds and created her growing medium. Earl watched the operation. You've got half the county bringing you their leftovers. Mara smiled. Only the useful leftovers. He shook his head. Still sounds crazy. That's okay. The larger experiment required more organization. Mara began recording everything. How much organic material went into each bed? How long it decomposed? How much irrigation each section required? Plant growth, soil moisture, weed pressure, harvest weight, root size. She wanted numbers, not opinions. Laura helped her design the trials. They planted some beds using Mara's waste-based system. Other beds used conventional soil preparation. Both received the same sweet potato variety. The results would be compared at harvest. Summer arrived hot and dry. The conventional beds struggled. The soil hardened quickly. Water evaporated faster. Weeds appeared almost immediately. Mara's beds behaved differently. The organic material held moisture. The soil remained loose. Earthworms multiplied. And weeds were easier to pull because they weren't rooted in compacted ground. Nathan noticed the difference first. He pressed his boot into one of the beds. Feels like a sponge. Mara nodded. That's the organic matter. Then came the heat wave. Temperatures stayed above normal for nearly 2 weeks. Several neighboring farms irrigated constantly. Mara reduced watering. Not because the plants needed less water. Because the soil held more of what it received. She monitored moisture carefully. The sweet potato vines continued growing. Their leaves remained thick and healthy. Earl stopped by one afternoon. He looked at Mara's field, then at his own, then back at hers. How often are you watering? Mara told him. He frowned. That's less than me. I know. What are you doing differently? Mara pointed toward the soil. Keeping the water here. By September, the vines had covered the beds completely. Mara knew harvest was approaching. She waited until the weather cooled. Then she dug the first test row. Her shovel entered the soil effortlessly. Mara pulled back the vines. And stopped. Sweet potatoes filled the earth beneath them. Large roots. Smooth skins. Very few deformities. Nathan crouched beside her. That's ridiculous. Mara laughed. Good ridiculous? Very good. They kept digging. The yield from the waste-amended beds was dramatically higher than the conventional beds. The roots were also more uniform. Mara checked the numbers twice. Then Laura checked them. Neither could dismiss the difference. It wasn't luck. The news spread. Farmers who had laughed at Mara now wanted to know how she had done it. Earl was first. He arrived with a truck. "What do I need?" Mara laughed. "That's not how this works." "Why not?" "Because your waste isn't the same as mine." She explained that the system depended on properly managed organic material, soil conditions, moisture, crop variety, and careful preparation. There was no magic recipe, but the principle was simple. Take useful farm waste, process it correctly, return it to the soil, grow a crop that benefits from loose, moisture-retentive soil. Earl nodded slowly. So the waste becomes the soil. Part of it, and the soil grows the sweet potatoes. Exactly. He looked toward his truck. "I've got 3 loads of old hay." Mara smiled. "Then we can start testing." Soon, farmers across the county began experimenting. One used vegetable trimmings. Another used old straw. A third used composted livestock bedding. Mara helped them avoid the mistakes she'd made. Don't use fresh material. Don't ignore nitrogen balance. Don't bury diseased plant material. Don't assume every waste stream is safe. Don't skip soil testing. And don't copy a system without adapting it to the farm. The method spread because it wasn't really a secret. It was a way of thinking. Then the buyers arrived. A regional produce distributor visited Mara's farm. They had heard about her sweet potatoes. They wanted consistent supply. Mara showed them the harvest. The buyer examined several roots. "These are excellent." "Thank you. How many acres can you grow?" Mara hesitated. 6 next year." The buyer smiled. "Can you make it 10? Mara looked at Nathan. He raised his eyebrows. The buyer continued. "We can take the entire crop." That was the moment Mara realized the $30 experiment had become a business. She didn't immediately expand to 10 acres. Instead, she scaled carefully. She built better composting areas, created material storage zones, installed improved irrigation, purchased harvesting equipment, and kept detailed records. The goal wasn't simply to grow more sweet potatoes. It was to prove that the system could remain profitable as it grew. By the 3rd year, Mara was cultivating 12 acres using variations of the waste-based method. The farm had become a destination for farmers interested in soil restoration and low-input agriculture. Earl became one of her biggest supporters. One afternoon, he stood beside Mara at the edge of his own field. His sweet potatoes were growing in beds made partly from old farm waste. He looked across the rows. "You know what bothers me?" Mara smiled. "What?" "I threw away all this stuff for 20 years. Mara laughed. "Most of us did." He picked up a handful of dark soil. "And now I'm growing food in it." That's the funny part. Mara eventually created a small farm waste collection partnership. Instead of nearby farms paying to dispose of certain organic materials, they could bring them to her processing site. Mara processed the material properly and used it in her own fields or sold finished soil amendments. The waste had become another part of the farm's income. The sweet potatoes became another. And the farm became more resilient because it wasn't dependent on just one source of revenue. Years after the original experiment, Mara still kept the first sweet potato she had harvested. Not the actual potato. It had long since been eaten. She kept a photograph. In it, she's kneeling beside that first enormous root, holding it with both hands while Nathan laughs behind her. Underneath the photograph, Mara wrote, $30. That's all. Because she wanted to remember how small the beginning had been. The neighbors had seen a field covered in waste. Mara had seen nutrients waiting to be returned to the soil.